Hey guys, welcome to Module 2 in the 7-Day Startup course. Let's get stuck in. So in this module, I'm going to be talking about an MVP, which is a minimum viable product. The 7-Day Startup founder, Eric Ries, coined this term, or maybe it was Steve Blank, it was one of those two, coined this term with the idea of what's the smallest amount of software you can build to learn what you need to learn. That was the whole idea. And in the Lean Startup, Eric Ries goes into a lot of detail around how he spent way too much time writing way too much code that really wasn't necessary for him to learn what he needed to learn to move on to the next step. So this idea of an MVP is what's the smallest amount you can do to put your product out there into the market and sort of test the market. The problem with the MVP, though, is it's very misunderstood. And in this course, this module, I want to talk about that a little bit, talk about some examples of what is a good MVP, what mistakes people make, and how you can think about what you're going to launch in 7 days and how you can make it look to the customer as much as you can like it's a finished product. Now, that doesn't mean it looks to you like it's a finished product. It means it looks to the customer like it's a finished product. So a common MVP mistake is overemphasizing the minimum and underemphasizing the viable. And what I mean by that is, again, you see this happen a lot with software, which is you've got this great idea for a software program, and for your MVP, what you do is you create 10% of the features and put that out there. And so you've got the minimum version there, but is it viable? Is that actually testing what you need to test? And if you're only giving people 10% of a product and they don't buy it, what did you learn from that? Did you learn that it's not a good idea? Well, not necessarily. Maybe they would buy it if you built the other 90%. So the difficulty with the MVP is the challenge of it is to how to give as close to 100% to the customer while doing close to 10% yourself. That's the challenge with it. So the key thing I want you to focus on during this module and when you're thinking about this 7-day startup week is what does the customer experience? So it doesn't matter what you build. It doesn't matter how you throw things together with gaffer tape and Zapier automations and manual spreadsheets and whatever you need to do to get this to work. What does matter is how it feels from a customer point of view and how close can you get to the vision of how your product and service is going to be like. How close can you get to that with the customer so you can really test whether if you're asking them to pay for something and they do pay for it or they don't pay for it, are you testing the right thing? Have you given them enough to know that you're testing the right thing? So you got to think about it from the customer's point of view. What does it look like to them? This was my MVP for WP Curve. From the customer's point of view, they got on my website and if they wanted a job fixed, they could see the live chat was available 24/7. They would go into the live chat, type in a message and get a reply on the other end. So from the customer's point of view, 2 years ago, when I had a couple of days to come up with this MVP, WP Curve was very similar to how it is now. That they go to the website, they submit a job mostly by email, but if they want to jump on live chat, they can, and they get a response. From my point of view, this was what it was like, except it wasn't an Android phone because I wouldn't use an Android phone. Horrible things. But this was what it was like. It was me in bed at nighttime, and during the day I was on my computer on the live chat. I had a free subscription to a live chat product that I had from my previous business, and at night I would go to bed and have my phone on as loud as it could to make sure it woke me up if someone came on live chat. Now, this is obviously not ideal, and I wasn't planning on running a live chat business for the rest of my life during my sleep. But for a minimum viable product, for a week of my life to test if this is the kind of thing people care about, like do people really want that 24/7 access? For me to test that, it was very easy. I just got an app. I kept the app next to my head when I went to sleep, and if it went off, I did my best to wake up and respond to the customer. From the customer point of view, it was exactly the same. With the business I did before this, which was the analytics software, informally, I did the opposite, which was I attempted to build a product and then only built about 10% of the features and tried to sell it. So I really was never able to build my true vision of the product, and therefore I was never really able to test with people whether or not they wanted to pay for it. So what I really should have done is how could I do that stuff manually? Like in hindsight, what I probably should have done is had a couple of buttons on the website. People go up, choose the services they want to connect to the analytics platform. That sends me an email. I go and crunch the data manually. The customer just says we'll send them a report once the data is crunched in a couple of hours, and I send them through the report. That would have been a really easy way to test it. Customer experience is quite similar to having a dashboard. It wouldn't have taken me a year to write the code, and what the customer would have got would have been an accurate reflection of my vision for the product. Now, software is particularly difficult, and it's been very difficult to find examples of people who've been able to build software and do it within a week with a 7-day startup idea. Bare Metrics was one idea that I covered in my book, which is an analytics dashboard that seemed to do everything right. That they did just Stripe data, and he got just the right amount of features in the first week of development to give people an idea of how this thing was going to work. But there weren't too many examples of software that I could find. So software is often not the example I choose when giving you a good example of an MVP for a 7-day startup. But I've got a couple of other examples in here I want to give you an idea of. So Noah Kagan started a business called AppSumo, and it was just deals, like online deals for electronic products for entrepreneurs. And he didn't build anything to start this business. He went onto Reddit and he looked at the kind of things people were buying, and he noticed they were buying Imager subscriptions because Imager was the platform that people use for uploading images on Reddit. And he contacted Imager and said, "Oh, can I have a deal for this? I'm going to sell it to a bunch of people." And he manually went out and started this process where he took a weekend and set the deal up, sold it to as many people as possible, worked out how much it cost him to do it and whether or not he was going to make money from it. At the end of the weekend, after doing everything manual, he was convinced that the traction he got was enough to start this AppSumo business. And this is 100% manual, no software whatsoever. Ended up creating a whole bunch of software and platform around what they do, and turned into $1 million business in a very short amount of time. Multi-million-dollar business, as I understand, in a very short amount of time. So that's one example of how you can do things manually to give the customer a very similar experience to what they will get like with AppSumo today, which is they see a website that has a deal on it, they either take the deal or they don't take the deal, and Noah was just doing everything manual behind the scenes. This is a really cool example. I love this one. Underground Cellar is a online subscription for wines, but it's got a twist. The thing with Underground Cellar is you have a chance of getting a wine that's a lot more expensive than the one you're buying. And the founder wanted to know if that kind of twist was significant for people. So if you go on there and say, okay, I'm going to buy a case of 6 wines, maybe one of the bottles of wine in there is going to be a $100 bottle of wine. Maybe it won't be. Much like a competition, not everyone gets a $100 bottle of wine for the $15. But occasionally that will happen. And he wanted to know if that was the kind of twist that would intrigue people. So he came up with a really genius idea of giving the customer a very similar experience, but offline instead of online. So instead of building any software, he simply had a party and told people that they could pay $15 to get a bottle of wine. And instead of giving everyone the bottle of wine they ordered, he gave some people a much more expensive bottle of wine, and obviously distributed the cost across the people. And what he wanted to test there was this the kind of thing that people would talk about? Would it be referable? Would it create a bit of a twist that is a conversation starter and gets people excited by the idea? And that's what he tested at that party. And he observed people spending all the time talking about this extra wine they got and spreading the word about what was going on. It went very successfully, and that gave him the confidence to start the online version of it. So I think that's a really smart way of doing it. It's doing everything manual. It's testing something pretty similar. I mean, it's not 100% the same, but the idea of the core idea of the business is to have that twist in the purchasing process, and he could test that core idea by throwing a party, which is just a lot of fun and probably a reasonably low alcohol spend. And then he's got the somewhat of the validation he needs. Now, I reluctantly use the word validation because he's not testing the exact same customer experience, but I think it's a really genius way of testing something offline when the ultimate product is going to be online. It's a smart thing to do, much smarter than spending a year building a platform and then sending it out and hoping that people are intrigued with this idea. The final version, and I'm really excited about this one, it's a company called Tidy in Sydney that does house cleaning. It's a marketplace. Now, there's a couple of reasons why I'm excited about this. One is, since I wrote the book, this company has gotten $750,000 in funding, which is no small feat for an Australian business. And Stacey started this by herself on a really small scale. I was really intrigued at the time because I thought this business would go really well in Australia. And the marketplace, the second reason I'm interested in it is marketplaces are often the sort of businesses that are funded companies just to start because they're double-sided. And you need customers to have their houses cleaned, and you need cleaners to clean the house. So they're notoriously difficult to start as a self-funded entrepreneur. But Stacey just took a really, really simple approach. She had a website done up. I think it was done in Squarespace or one of those really quick launch platforms. I don't think it was even a WordPress site. It was done really quickly. It looked quite nice. And then she just went on to Gumtree, I think it was, and interviewed a couple of cleaners and said, look, I'm starting this thing. I just want to have 2 or 3 cleaners down to note available if I get some customers. She chose a specific area in Sydney. I think it was a pretty well-off area that she chose, and marketed just in that area with flyers, and got a couple of customers, had a couple of suppliers, had a really miniature version of this marketplace available, and set a fixed price to make it really simple. And she started this business just from that. And from there, it was clear that it was working, and then all she had to do there was get more customers and more suppliers. And since then has gone on to get this funding and will no doubt create a really significant business out of it. So I think the marketplace idea, the example of doing it from marketplace is super cool. From a customer's point of view, the experience is exactly the same. They get a fixed price house cleaner, and they get a nice looking website. They can sign up. It's all very similar. But for Stacey, she took zero risk in doing this and was able to launch it really, really quickly. So these are some of the questions you need to ask yourself when you're thinking about the MVP. How can you perform a service or offer a product to real customers? And this is an MVP, again, is not a 10% version of something. It's how can you do what you want to do for these customers for real people and charge them for it. That's the way I think about an MVP. How will you get them to pay you after 7 days? So this is what I want to challenge you with, is if you're going to launch a business in 7 days, how are they going to pay you? Are you just going to put up a PayPal button? I'm starting a business at the moment, a community for the 7-day startup, and the Stripe now is available in Australia. It's available overseas. I was able to set up a Stripe subscription, an SSL for security, a Stripe one-off payment button, and a payment button for this course all in 1 day. Very, very quickly, very, very simple. Take credit card payments in 1 day. It used to be PayPal is almost the only way you could do that. But you can now do that with Stripe, which is an amazing platform to use. And this is something you need to think about now. So how are you going to actually take people's money? Because at the end of the 7 days, that's what you need to be doing. How close will your MVP be to the final vision of your product? So it doesn't need to be the same version as your product, because whatever goes on behind the scenes can be manual and can be ugly and held together with duct tape. But how close, from a customer's point of view, will it be to your final vision of what this product or service is going to be like? And it needs to be close if you're going to use this information to decide if your business is going to work or not. What can you do manually? And again, I've showed you lots of examples about doing offline things, using spreadsheets instead of software. Anything you can do manually, do it manually. In the case of payment, I think it's so easy to set up a buy now button that you can automate that. But what can you do behind the scenes that the customer doesn't see manually, as opposed to writing all the code or building the service and employing people and doing all the stuff you do once you're up and running? What can you do yourself instead of delegating? Of course, eventually you want a scalable business where you can get other people to do all the work for you. But for the purpose of this week and for the purpose of hustling and getting started, what can you do yourself? How can you make your offer as real as possible for the end customer? So this is the fundamental learning out of this chapter, out of this module, which is what's it going to look like for the customer? How can you make it as real as possible? It's probably unlikely you're going to be able to make it 100% exactly the same for that customer, but how high can you make it? Can you make it 60%? Can you make it 85%? As close as you can make it to the vision of your final product from the customer's point of view, that's what you need to be aiming for. That's the end of this module. I hope this has been useful for you. The MVP, it's tricky. It really is tricky, but think about it from the customer's point of view. How are you going to get something up in 7 days that represents good value for them and does a good job at testing whether or not this business is going to fly for you? Thanks for doing this module, and I'll see you in the next one.